Welcome back, friends, to the second part of this mini-series. If somehow you find yourself here without seeing the first video, the link is in the description. Before we continue, I appreciate all the comments in the first video, correcting or adding on to the points I have made, with some that now seem so obvious I was actually kicking myself for not including them initially. So again, be sure to leave your thoughts down below, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off strong with a try not to get demonetized challenge, Molag Bal is the god of schemes, the lord of brutality, and prince of domination, the harvester of souls, and the king of not asking for consent. Quite possibly the most evil deity on this list, while other Daedra may have some redeeming qualities, or at least usefulness, Molag Bal, objectively speaking, is an absolute prick. His fears are domination and enslavement, as he seeks to harvest the souls of all mortals, even being credited with the creation of soul gems in his unquenchable thirst for mortal essence. Molag Bal, in his infinite desire to enslave and dominate, famously invaded Nirn in the Second Era, as per the events of the Elder Scrolls Online, potentially the most catastrophic Daedric incursion into the mortal realm in history. Arguably even more apocalyptic than the later Oblivion Crisis, the so-called Plane Melt wasn't a mere invasion. It attempted to erode the entire structure of the universe, seeking to merge Nirn and Molag Bal's own realm of Coldharbour. Dark anchors fell from the sky, burying deep into the scarred flesh of Mundus. Daedra poured from Oblivion, killing indiscriminately, each mortal death accelerating the erosion of the barrier between Coldharbour and reality. Only through great sacrifice and the help of Meridia, Bal's sworn enemy, was the apocalypse prevented. Coldharbour itself appears as a mocking image of Nirn, often a sad imitation of the mortal realm, and sometimes entire stolen sections of the continent comprising the desolate and dark plane of Oblivion. A clear reflection of the corrupt master of Coldharbour, as evil cannot create anything new. It can only corrupt and ruin what good forces have invented or made. The parts of the Pocket Realm that do show life are inhabited by lesser Daedra loyal to Bal, such as the Sivkin, and also by the Soul-Shriven, those unfortunate mortals that had their souls stolen by the Daedra, forever bound to the Prince of Domination in an eternal unpaid internship. Easily top 10 worst jobs in Tamriel. Among those unfortunate enough to end up in Coldharbour are also the souls of vampires, as it is Molag Bal that is their progenitor. The curse of vampirism came about at the dawn of time, when Tamriel was still young. Bal traveled to the mortal realm, where he engaged in brutal and very involuntary union with a Nedic woman named Lame. As Lame rose from the dead as the first vampire, the curse would continue to spread, making a mockery of the natural cycle of life and death. Believe it or not, even deities such as Molag Bal can find those willing to worship them. Various fringe groups such as vampires, Reachmen clans, Maomer slave traders, as well as necromancers such as the infamous Worm Cult, all revere the god of brutality. Interestingly, he is also held in high regard by the Dreg, a beastfolk race that are said to have been far more intelligent in the past, and once had a great civilization. Those of Daedra's followers that win his favor are blessed with his gifts, most famously the Mace of Molag Bal, a brutal weapon that drains the magicka and stamina of its victims. The inspirations for Molag Bal are quite more direct and obvious than some of the others in the Daedric pantheon. The name itself, Molag Bal, is a combination of two real-world deities, Moloch and Baal. Moloch, or Molech, was mentioned several times in the book of Leviticus of the Hebrew Bible. A Canaanite god, he is most often associated with human, and sometimes even child, sacrifice, with the Hebrew word Moloch identical in spelling to the Punic word for sacrifice. Indeed, the Punic Carthaginians, as described by both Roman and Greek sources, were keen on the practice of sacrificing children by burning, perhaps propagandistic slander by their Roman enemies, or perhaps the truth, as indicated by archaeological discoveries of urns of cremated child remains in Carthage in the 1920s. Regardless, Moloch in the modern era is associated with a higher power demanding egregious sacrifice, much in line with the Prince of Domination's behavior. Baal, again in the ancient Semitic languages of the Levant, means lord or owner, powerful titles that eventually became associated with gods, in particular the deity Hadad, a storm and fertility god of ancient Mesopotamia, who the Hebrew Bible decreed to be a false idol. It is also possible that Baal refers to Baal, a demon from the Lesser Key of Solomon, one of the first demonological grimoires written. Finally, Baal shares linguistic roots with Baal-Zebub, or, as more familiar to us, Beelzebub, a Philistine god that in Abrahamic religions became associated with Satan himself. Indeed, the influence of Satan/Lucifer from Christian theology is obvious with Molag Bal, more so than any other Daedric prince. The title Harvester of Souls mirrors Satan's role as the Master of Hell, receiving the souls of the damned, Cold Harbor possibly being the most hellish of all realms, full of enslaved mortals, trapped in a distorted parody of life. Among the most unsettling and reclusive of Daedric princes, Namira is the mistress of decay, darkness, and hunger. She is often associated with slugs, spiders, and other things that provoke a feeling of instinctive disgust in mortals.
Oh, you motherfuckers.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Right.
Appropriately, her spheres are rot, decay, vermin, and all things repulsive. In line with her obscure spheres, Namira is often out of the spotlight when it comes to Daedric gods, and unlike some of her divine siblings that embody power or ambition, the Lord of Decay is patron to the rejects, pariahs, and those cast off by society. It is easy, therefore, to assume that the withdrawn deity is of lesser importance or influence, but that could not be further from the truth. According to some, Namira is the oldest of the Daedric princes. For example, as per Khajiit mythology, she is the very embodiment of the void, the great primordial darkness from before time existed as a concept. Indeed, even other sources associate the Daedra with eternity. The catfolk of elsewhere believe that it was Namira that corrupted Lorkhaj, their interpretation of Lorcan, to trap the primordial spirits in the mortal mundus after its creation, for which they ripped out his heart. There are many versions of Lorcan's story, perhaps a subject for a future video, but in the Khajiit telling of the tale, Namira occupied the wound of where Lorcan's heart was, and only Azura was able to save him, removing the dark heart and throwing it into the void. From this dark heart rose the Moon Beast, the first of the Dromathra, corrupt Khajiit whose souls are bound to Namira. While the catfolk consider Namira the enemy of the living and see her as needing to be placated rather than worshipped, some Reachmen clans do revere the Daedra, seeing her as a spirit of darkness and endings, but also rebirth, as that theme often goes hand in hand with decay, representing the cycle of life and death. Reachmen aside, Namira is worshipped by various secretive cults, as these dark deities tend to be. Her followers often engage in cannibalism and choose to live in darkness and squalor, though typically hiding this behavior from society, who would rightfully view it as repulsive and disgusting. But at the same time, that is the appeal of the Dark Prince. She is a patron of those that are shunned by society, of beggars and rejects, seducing those who feel abandoned by other gods. While Malakath patronizes outcasts through strength, defiance, and endurance, in an embrace the suck kind of way, Namira urges her followers to fully descend into their corruption and decay, rather than fight against it. Much like the Dark Deity, little is known about Namira's realm except the name, the Scuttling Void. Occasionally, rifts between it and Mundus may appear, known to the Khajiit as the Maw of Lorcaj, from which the vicious Dromathra flood the mortal plane. Those desperate enough to follow Namira and gain her favor may be rewarded with gifts from the Mistress of Decay, the most famous, or infamous rather, of which is the Ring of Namira, which reflects damage and also empowers the wearer through acts of cannibalism. Like the other Daedra, Namira is a fusion of several real-life influences, though again, they are more obscure than the straightforward of princes, as her spheres of vermin and rot aren't exactly grandiose subjects for human worship. Disease and plague, on the other hand, are recurring themes in our history, and therefore are ever present in mythology. Very fittingly, for the main inspiration of the possibly oldest deity within the Daedric pantheon, let's have a look at the earliest human civilizations on the planet, in the region of ancient Mesopotamia. Through all periods of Mesopotamian history, the deity Nergal was worshipped as the god of war, death, and most importantly, disease. Mainly symbolizing the destructive force of both humanity and nature, he was also the ruler of Kur, the Mesopotamian underworld. Those of you familiar with Warhammer might immediately recognize the god of pestilence of the same name from the Games Workshop universe, who apparently didn't go very far with the influence for their deity, directly ripping the name for their own use. This is the same company, by the way, that copyright strikes its own fan content. The Akkadians, who historically established the first known empire, were a Mesopotamian culture that worshipped the deity Era, a plague god that we know of due to multiple copies of a poem recovered across various archaeological sites. This epic of Era tells of the deity striking down foes of Babylon with a plague, along with several of its other battles. What you see now on screen is an amulet to ward off plague, inscribed with a quotation from the Era epic, written in cuneiform, a writing system prevalent in ancient Mesopotamia and Persia, among other places. If it looks familiar, that is because Bethesda most likely used it as an inspiration for the language of the dragons that we see in Skyrim. The in-game writing system was meant to represent the dragons actually etching the words with their claws, similar to how ancient Mesopotamians etched cuneiform into wet clay tablets using reed styluses. The last reference to the pantheon of the ancient cradle of human civilization is perhaps the mythological figure of Namtar. Depending on the context, possibly either a minor god or a demon, this entity too represented disease and the underworld. While not as prominent as Nergal or Era, Namtar too is from the Mesopotamian pantheon that seemingly inspired Namira, and is too phonetically similar to the Daedra in name. Finally, Namira's domain of primordial darkness relates closely to the ancient Greek goddess Nyx, who is often considered to be the first deity to exist of her pantheon, much like Namira is in the Elder Scrolls. She is credited to be the mother of various deities embodying negative forces, such as Moros of Doom, Thanatos of Death, and Geras of Old Age, all vaguely corresponding to Namira's spheres in-game. Nocturnal is the Daedric Prince of Night and Shadows, and is the main Gunnar material of pre-modded Skyrim back in 2011. That's right, I know what kind of man you are. A patron to all those that embrace darkness in their shadowy dealings, her spheres are Shadow, Night, and Luck. Much like the reclusive Namira, not much is known about Nocturnal, the deity appropriately keeping to the shadows, as is her custom. What we do know is that the Lady of Twilight and Mystery contests Namira for the title of Ur-Dra, the oldest Daedric prince, both having come from the original primordial darkness. It is unclear as to exactly who was first, as sources do vary. The Imperial Geographical Society claims it was Nocturnal, with even Sotha Sil and the Sijic Order in agreement, while the Khajiit mythology, where a lot of our knowledge of Namira comes from, has its own version. According to the denizens of Elsewhere, when Azura removed the dark heart from Lorkhaj, or Lorcan, the heart kept beating, spewing black blood onto the floor. From this pool of dark blood, Nocturnal, or Noctra as the Khajiit call her, was born. Azura allowed Noctra to live, as long as she served her and her chosen people, the Khajiit. Noctra, though, rebellious by nature, fled to the void, escaping Azura and her responsibilities to the catfolk. However, many Khajiit clans do call on her for aid, particularly in less than legal endeavors. And Noctra often answers, granting luck, darkness to hide in, and silent movement. For, as we all know, according to the Penitus Oculatus crime statistics, despite making up 4% of Skyrim's population, Khajiit are responsible for. While the Khajiit way of worship is often tied to their own creation myths, and the lines between fact and fiction are often blurred, this does give us at least somewhat of an insight into the Daedric Prince of Shadows. Cat people aside, Nocturnal is widely worshipped by thieves of all kinds. One particular group, known as the Nightingales, a trio of highly skilled thieves, usually chosen from the upper echelon of the Thieves' Guild, guard the Twilight Sepulchre, a temple to the Daedra. Indeed, Nocturnal is a patron to the guild, and the organization's success often hinges on whether or not they have the Daedra's favor. Within the Twilight Sepulchre is a portal to the Evergloam, Nocturnal's personal pocket of oblivion. Fittingly to the theme of the Daedra, It is a place of eternal twilight, constantly shifting and changing shape. Some even say that due to its shadowy and obscure nature, it can even be glimpsed from the mortal realm if one stares into the darkness. The realm is full of dark forests, crumbling buildings, and crypts dot the purple landscape. The souls of mortals that end in Evergloam turn to shadows and roam the plane along with the various Nocturnal affiliated lesser Daedra. Particularly skilled thieves and others that earn the favor of the Prince of Shadows are blessed not just with luck, but more material gifts also. The Grey Cowl is perhaps the most famous of these, a dark leather helm that obscures the wearer's identity and is often associated with the Grey Fox, a legendary thief. The Skeleton Key is also worth mentioning, an artifact that allows to open any lock, both physical and metaphysical, such as portals. It is the Nightingale's job to guard this artifact, although Nocturnal is said to allow the key to be stolen or lost periodically, most likely for her own entertainment. While Namira embodies the corrupting darkness, the primordial original void, and the rot all things end with, Nocturnal represents more so night and shadow itself as a concept, with even her name being an obvious homage to the night. Given her overlap with Namira, many inspiration for the Prince of Decay are also applicable here, such as the Greek deity Nyx, representing primordial darkness. Indeed, Nocturnal seems to be a mix of a whole bunch of Olympian deities. Hecate, who we brought up a while back, is not only the goddess of the moon, which is why she was mentioned in Azura's section, but also of the night, and is sometimes associated with secrecy, very fitting to Nocturnal's theme. The messenger god Hermes, the herald of Olympus, lends inspiration here as he is widely considered to be patron of thieves, much like the Daedric prince. Finally, Tyche, a mythological figure that embodies the whims of fate, represents Nocturnal's sphere of luck, as she blesses those she favors either with incredible fortune or with severe bad luck. The ever-relevant trickster god archetype is also clearly present here, like the Norse Loki or the West African spider god Anansi, but there is a less mythological influence that really stands out to me with Nocturnal, and this one is more in the realm of wild speculation. The Daedra seems to draw inspiration from literary Gothic traditions, in particular the American author Edgar Allan Poe, most known for his poems and short stories dealing with mysteries and the obscure. Perhaps his most famous work, the narrative poem The Raven, immortalizes the bird as a symbol of darkness and the unknown, quite fitting to Nocturnal's themes and her association with ravens and crows. The poem follows an unnamed narrator mourning the death of his beloved, conversing with the titular raven, whose response to any query is one word: nevermore. The themes of fate, inevitability, and encroaching darkness ever present in The Raven and Poe's other works, as well as perhaps the coincidental phonetic similarity between the famous Nevermore and the Daedric realm of Evergloam, resonate deeply with Nocturnal. The only reason why Namira isn't considered the worst smelling of the Daedric princes, Peryite is the god of pestilence and plague, the blighted lord, the bringer of disease. Known as the Taskmaster, Peryite's spheres also include natural order, and he is entrusted with maintaining structure among the lesser Daedra and in the lower planes of oblivion. Therefore, being a foul, pestilent creature tasked with enforcing rules essentially makes Peryite a Daedric Reddit mod. In terms of direct interaction, Peryite is one of the lesser known of the princes. Considered also to be the weakest, he rarely appears before mortal eyes. When he does leave his basement, he chooses to appear in a mocking parody of a mighty Dova, a dragon, choosing the visage of the most powerful race to compensate for his lowly rank among the Daedric pantheon. That is not to say that Peryite had no impact on Mundus. His plagues have been known to have devastating effects, with rumors persisting that he even had a hand in the Thracian plague. This was an epidemic developed by the necromantic Slode that made the bubonic plague look like a mild flu. This disease was said to wipe out half of Tamriel's population back in the First Era, and even hundreds of years after the peak of the epidemic, cases still were being reported. But perhaps even more impressively, Peryite's plagues have the capacity to infect other Daedric realms, and even Daedric princes. Peryite's Plane of Oblivion is known simply as the Pits. It is unknown definitively what this realm looks like, some parts appearing as a rocky cave system filled with a hazy green poisonous fog, while other parts resemble the Deadlands, with lava seas, volcanic islands, and ruined structures. The realm is populated with the Taskmaster's servants, typically consisting of various creatures infected by Peryite's plagues. The Prince of Pestilence is worshipped by several secret cults across Tamriel. Interestingly, some of his followers view him as a cosmic balancer of sorts, seeing the plague as cleansing and restoring natural order. Others are simply disease-ridden outcasts that band together to revel in their own suffering and to spread their illness to others. Those that earn the favor of the Daedric Prince may receive his gifts. While some may be blessed with herpes or mega AIDS, others are with powerful artifacts. The Dwarven Mage Shield Spellbreaker is perhaps the most well-known of these. How it became associated with Peryite is unclear, but regardless, it is an exceptionally powerful piece of equipment, protecting the wielder not just from physical damage, but also reflecting spells back at whatever elvish nerd that cast them. Being the deity of disease, Peryite shares many of his influences with the goddess of decay, Namira. The Mesopotamian Nergal, Era, and Namtar are all applicable to Peryite also. The lion-headed Egyptian goddess Sekhmet was said to bring plagues, which acted as her servants and messengers. However, Sekhmet was also worshipped to ward from disease, somewhat reflecting Peryite's contradictory role as both carrier of plague and maintainer of order. The purpose of avoiding the repetition of the previously mentioned Mesopotamian gods does give us a chance to explore some other cultures that have personifications of disease. The Hindu goddess Shitala, which translates from Sanskrit as coolness, is a deity related to disease, and more specifically, smallpox. Being linked to a singular disease may not sound particularly impactful, but smallpox was truly a serious issue, with a 30% mortality rate in unvaccinated individuals, leaving survivors as disfigured and scarred as the followers of Peryite. Primarily venerated in North India, Shitala was believed to both cause and cure smallpox, and interestingly, some of her devotees even saw the disease as a blessing and an opportunity to reflect, a clear parallel to the worshippers of Peryite. The Book of Revelation, the last book of the New Testament, speaks of a scroll in God's right hand. As 4 of the 7 seals are broken, the same number of beings are summoned, known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The first of them, upon a white horse, is seen as conquest by some interpretations, while other traditions view him as pestilence or plague. The rider, wearing a crown and carrying a bow, spreads plague from his brass quiver full of germs and diseases, as he and his 3 companions bring about divine judgment and the end times. One can't help observe similarities between the biblical horseman and the Daedric prince. The spread of disease, the purpose of cosmic balance, and fulfilling a divine role, finally the juxtaposition of a regal elevated appearance, a crowned horseman, or a mighty dragon spreading an abject low force that is sickness and disease. The last point to mention here is the mineral Peryite, potentially influencing the Daedra's name. A mineral of iron sulfide, its brass yellow hue resembles a much more precious metal, and it is hence known as fool's gold. Much like the weakest of the princes, cosplaying as a mighty Dova, possibly the most powerful creature in Tamriel, Peryite lacks the value of real gold, and has fooled many a prospector with its false promise. Perhaps, much like the delusional followers of Peryite, seek value in his worship instead of, taking a shower. To his followers, Sanguine is the lord of revelry, blood made pleasure, and he who tastes the shaven fruit. No matter how many times I record this, I can't read it properly. The writers at Bethesda used to be absolute freaks, and then we went from the Daedric god of eating ass to them trying to convince us that this is how strip clubs are supposed to look like in the year 2330. Clearly, Sanguine's fears are hedonism, debauchery, and overall just having a good time. Though, as with even the seemingly less evil Daedric gods, there is a dark side to the Prince of Revelry. Much easier to understand than Peryite's gifts of disease or Namira's filth, Sanguine's offers are tempting to even the most restrained of mortals. And yet, the indulgence of all primal urges and the lack of restraint easily leads one down the path of excess and addiction, resulting in ruin, humiliation, destroyed lives, and relationships. Unsurprisingly, Sanguine is likelier than most of his siblings to take part in mortal affairs, enjoying playing pranks on the unsuspecting denizens of Nirn, even catching the player character a few times. While taking on the form of whatever he deems appropriate for his current joke, his most consistent physical form is that of an inebriated, portly man, often depicted with a bottle. The Prince of Debauchery rules over the plane of oblivion known as the Myriad Realms of Revelry, and as the name would imply, it is a collection of pocket realms as opposed to a singular location. Each pocket dimension is fashioned to suit the needs and the desires of the prince or his visitors. It is in his realm that Sanguine holds, quote, the best parties in Oblivion, though I cannot see how any of the other princes, like Molag Bal for example, the god of not consent, could be any competition. Also, funny to note is that canonically, Malakath isn't even invited to these events, as nobody likes him. Sanguine's parties aren't all joy though. Those that stay too long may end up staying until their very death, and sometimes the entertainers at these events may end up unknowingly signing a contract that binds them eternally to the Daedra's service, and many were forced to follow an ancient Japanese tradition just to escape. Despite this, the followers of Sanguine insist that the Daedra does not act out of malice. Often viewed as the weaker of the Daedric princes, there are no centralized cults worshipping the Prince of Revelry. Instead, he is often invoked at parties or festivals, as well as being revered by small sects and secret gatherings. In line with his theme of excess, these little cults can often get carried away in the thrill of debauchery, their pleasure turning to perversion, and some engage in taboo acts, sometimes going as far as human sacrifice. Those that find a way to impress Sanguine may receive powerful artifacts as a token of appreciation. The most recognized of these is the Sanguine Rose, an object that is known to take many forms, but most often that of a staff, with a carved wooden rose at its head. A potent artifact, the rose summons a lesser Daedra. However, unlike the conventional way of using conjuration magic, the creature summoned by the staff is blessed by Sanguine with one too many chromosomes, and uncontrollably attacks everything in sight, except the wielder of the rose. The inspiration for Sanguine are quite clear. His role as the patron of revelry, debauchery, and excess have multiple mythological and cultural influences. The most immediate and obvious of which is the Greek god of wine, theatre, and festivity Dionysus, or the Roman plagiarized equivalent of Bacchus. A rare case of an almost one-to-one mirror image between the game and real-life mythology, as Dionysus was not just the god of wine, but also the patron of ritual madness and religious ecstasy. This frenzy that the deity's followers self-induced was called the Bacchaea. The famous Athenian playwright Euripides composed a tragedy of almost the same name, the Bacchae, which tells of Dionysus driving the king of Thebes insane, and in a resulting orgy, the king is killed by the frenzied participants. Much like Sanguine, Dionysus is joyous and merry, until he is not, driving mortals to madness and ruin. The Greco-Roman deity is also associated with various festivals, such as Liberalia and Bacchanalia, famous for scandalous and debauched acts, to the point that the Roman historian Livy describes it as cultish conspiracy against the state. Being the god of festivities, there are of course parallels to be seen here also. Still on the subject of ancient Rome, the famous Saturnalia festival was held on the 17th of December, as per the Julian calendar. The celebration was held in honor of the god Saturn, and involved partying, gambling, and so on. By the 1st century BC, this celebration extended until December 23rd, and eventually, in 274 AD, the festivities were supplemented by the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, or the birthday of the invincible sun, which was on the 25th of December, a date many of you will recognize as Christmas, which, as you know, is not the actual date of Christ's birth. The pagan aspects eventually faded and were replaced by Christian elements, but the tradition of gift-giving, candles, and greenery decorations remains with us to this very day. So why the history lesson? Well, you see, the writers at Bethesda, in a fit of creative inspiration, designated the 25th day of Evening Star, the last and 12th month of the Tamrielic calendar, to be the Breton celebration of Saturalia. That's Saturnalia, but without the N. It is a time of gift-giving and parties, and reindeer are often associated with the celebration, which came to overlap with the more well-known cross-continental festival of New Life, which is literally Christmas but in the Elder Scrolls. The initial cause of this celebration is relevant, however. Although faded from history, much like the Saturnalian origins of Christmas, a tale speaks of a, quote, long-forgotten god of debauchery that created a frozen steed to rescue a mortal during a frozen storm. On a less festive topic, Sanguine represents several of the 7 deadly sins as per the teachings of the Catholic Church. Pope Gregory I, the 64th Bishop of Rome in the 6th century of our era, established the concept of each sin being embodied by a particular demon. Particularly relevant to Sanguine are Asmodeus and Beelzebub, representing lust and gluttony respectively, in line with the Daedric's theme of excess. Finally, we come to the name, Sanguine. An adjective in English, it means optimistic or positive, especially in an apparently bad or difficult situation. The word does come from the Latin sanguis, meaning blood. Hippocrates, the famous Greek physician after whom the oath taken by medical professionals is named, proposed a theory that human mood is determined by bodily fluids. An overabundance of blood caused an individual to be sanguine or optimistic. However, despite this innocent origin of the word, one can't help but hear the darker echo of blood sacrifices to Sanguine in the debauched orgies dedicated to the Daedric Prince of Excess. Finally, everyone's favorite cheese man. Sheogorath is the Daedric Prince of Madness, known by many other names. The Trickster, the Lord of the Deranged, the Skooma Cat, or just simply the Mad God, though he was not always such. Indeed, Sheogorath's situation is unique among the Daedric pantheon, for he is just one face of a coin. On the flip side is Jiggalag, the god of order and deduction, and the polar opposite of the Mad God. In ancient times, before recorded history, Jiggalag's realm of perfect order expanded across the seas of oblivion. His domain is said to have contained a great library, with logical predictions of every detail of every event that would ever take place. The Prince of Order mathematically figuring out the entire universe. The rest of the Daedric pantheon, chaotic and unpredictable, feared this order and logic, as well as Jiggalag himself, who grew to be the most powerful among the princes. In a rare case of cooperation, the rest of the pantheon united and collectively cursed the Prince of Order to live as Sheogorath, the chaotic Mad God, the incarnation of the very thing Jiggalag hated the most. His perfect realm of order turned into the Shivering Isles, a mad realm often referred to as the Asylums, populated by equally insane Daedra and mortals alike. This new realm consists of a main landmass surrounded by smaller islands, as fractured as the mind of the Mad God. The land is split in two, a common theme with Sheogorath. The colorful northern part is known as Mania, representing the lighter, silly side of Uncle Sheo's madness. The southern part, Dementia, mostly made up of swamps and dead trees, is the embodiment of the dark, violent streak of Sheogorath's insanity. The only echoes of the Isle's previous incarnation as a realm of order are crystal obelisks that dot the Isles, and Daius, the keeper of Jiggalag's once great library, imprisoned within its ruins. The curse of the Mad God stipulates that at the end of every era, Jiggalag would be allowed to assume his true form and return to the Shivering Isles in an event known as the Grey March, preceded by the arrival of his Daedric Knights of Order. Each time, Jyggalag would destroy the Isles, only to transform back to the Mad God, forced to rebuild his realm, forever stuck in an endless cycle of creation and destruction. After many attempts, Sheogorath finally managed to stop the Grey March by summoning a mortal champion to his aid. None other than the hero of Kvatch, the protagonist of Oblivion, after mantling, that is, becoming one with Sheogorath, was able to defeat Jyggalag and hence break the curse. It is unclear what actually happened to Jyggalag after, but being finally separated from the aspect of Sheogorath, he disappeared into Oblivion, perhaps to one day return to his role as the Prince of Order. The hero of Kvatch, meanwhile, remained elevated to the role of the Mad God. So yes, for those of you that did not already know, the Sheogorath you meet in Skyrim is the protagonist of the previous game, though how much of the hero of Kvatch remains within the personality of the insane deity is up for debate. Some have noted that Uncle Sheo became significantly more chill after the last Grey March, perhaps an echo of the hero that mantled him. That being said, and especially in bygone eras, the prince is as dangerous as he is unpredictable. Further in line with his main theme of duality, the Daedra can appear jovial, upbeat, speaking in jests and riddles, only to instantly shift to sadism. Just like a joke which can be light-hearted and humorous, or can cut deeper than any blade. Those that follow the Mad God are as deranged as he is. Outcasts, eccentrics, and strange cults worship the insane deity, as well as some artists claiming Daedric inspiration. Those Sheogorath deems useful, or just entertaining enough, are blessed with the gifts of the trickster god, the most famous of which is, of course, the Wabbajack, a staff carved in the fashion of an actual soyjack of Sheogorath. This predictably unpredictable instrument can turn its victims into a random creature, as well as produce other effects, such as damaging, healing, or turning into a rock. In terms of real-world influences, the yin-yang of Sheogorath and Jyggalag draw on various inspirations. Let's begin with the chronologically first figure of the God of Order. It is in our very human nature to seek order among chaos, to organize and to understand, as our hyper-evolved ape brains instinctively recognize patterns and try to make sense of the natural disorder of our world. Unsurprisingly, many deities and philosophical concepts reflect this innate human drive. The ancient Egyptians, well known for their advanced society and love for perfectly geometrical shapes, worshipped the goddess Mat as the personification of truth, balance, and order. The daughter of the sun god Ra, she tasked the pharaohs in maintaining order and justice, to hold the line against the forces of Isfet, a force personifying chaos, a situation much similar to the Jyggalag-Sheogorath dichotomy. Still on the topic of religion, there are some parallels between Jyggalag and the medieval Christian depiction of the heavenly hosts. The radiant and pure angelic legions serve God in maintaining divine order, fighting disorder and chaos, such as during the fall of Lucifer. Structured and hierarchical, the angels are organized into strict ranks, such as the seraphim, cherubim, and the archangels. The cherubim in particular were described by Ezekiel, a famous Israelite priest, as particularly incomprehensible and geometric, like wheels within eyes, in line with Jyggalag's abstract concept. Indeed, the occurrence of the Grey March is reminiscent of the Crusades, intended to destroy what the god in whose name the campaign is fought deemed to be impure. This might get a little bit abstract, so bear with me, but Jigalag is not without philosophical influences too. What is order but the drive to understand and therefore control chaos? Great minds across human history have long pondered this. The ancient Greeks, for example, Heraclitus specifically, employed the philosophical term logos as a principle of order and knowledge. The term was used as rational principle in philosophical discourse, in contrast to ethos or ideology and pathos or emotion. Even the famous Plato discussed the so-called theory of forms, where he envisioned a realm of perfect, unchanging forms, or mathematical and rational ideals of which the material world is an imperfect copy, just like the Shivering Isles are a parody of Jigalag's crystalline realm. Now, as for the name, Jigalag has no visible real-world etymology, but if there's one thing that we like to do on this channel is engage in wild speculation. Jigalag consists of 3 heavy syllables with hard consonants. The rigid pronunciation almost sounds like you're hammering the syllables into place, quite on theme with the unforgiving god of order. Jig is quite similar to the Norse Ig, as in Yggdrasil, the world tree, the rigid, orderly backbone of the cosmos that supports the 9 worlds of Scandinavian mythology, while the ending Alag is reminiscent of the Old Testament-inspired Daedric names like Molag. Now then, on to Uncle Sheo. Unsurprisingly, the Elder Scrolls god of trickery draws heavily on inspirations from multiple real-world trickster deities. The last time I bring him up, I swear, but Loki is perhaps the most clear and well-known influence. Known for his unpredictability, cunning, and shape-shifting, Loki occupies a similar role in the Norse pantheon as Sheogorath does in the Daedric. Both are known to change identities and shape for the sake of their own, often incomprehensible goals, as well as having a dubious origin. Loki is born of the giants, yet lives among the Aesir or the gods, while Sheogorath too is ambiguously the transformed version of Jigalag, a completely different divine entity. Even the apocalyptic Grey March, intended to destroy the Shivering Isles, is somewhat reminiscent of Ragnarok, the end of the world, which, funny enough, is the result of Loki's actions, as he orchestrated the death of the god Balder, which kicked off the events of the Norse apocalypse. Now, instead of beating the dead horse of Norse mythology, let's take this opportunity to explore some, perhaps lesser-known cultural interpretations of the divine "it's just a prank, bro." The coyote is a mythological character common in several indigenous cultures of North America. Despite their wildly different appearance, the flamboyant Daedra and the cunning animal share their love of mischief and trickery, seen as a force of neither good nor evil, but rather chaos. The coyote is both creator and destroyer. According to some stories, it was he who shaped the rivers and the mountains, and even brought fire to the humans. Yet other stories speak of his greed and even foolishness, a dichotomy reminiscent of Sheogorath's manic and depressive episodes. Speaking of mania, the namesake word of a part of the Shivering Isles comes to us from, of course, the ancient Greeks. In Plato's dialogues, mania was not simply madness. It was a divine frenzy, a deity touching one's soul. In one of his dialogues, Plato states, "The greatest of blessings comes to us through madness, provided it is bestowed by divine gift." According to the famous Greek philosopher, there were 4 various types of mania, one of which, being poetic, coming from the Muses. These were goddesses of the arts who inspired poets, musicians, and writers, just like Sheogorath, the Lord of Mania, is often credited by Tamrielic artists for their own inspiration. The final parallel, maybe more of a coincidence, is Friedrich Nietzsche and the death of God. In his famous work, The Gay Science, the madman figure proclaims the death of God at the hands of humanity. Nietzsche, though, often misunderstood as nihilistic, actually believed that this death of God could be overcome by humanity by creating new meanings and values, hence becoming Übermensch or Superman. The death of an abstract deity, the association with insanity, and replacement of an obsolete god with something new resonates deeply with Jiggalag and his new form of the mad deity Sheogorath. Okay, that's enough about philosophy. Let's take a look at the trickster god's name. The meta-reason is that Sheogorath is named after his creator, Ted or Theodore Peterson, one of the main designers and writers at Bethesda in the 90s and 2000s. Other influences may include the ever-present H.P. Lovecraft and his fictional Shoggoth creature, an incomprehensible, shapeless monstrosity. Lovecraftian horrors in general seem to follow a similar naming convention, with a commonly used ath or oth ending, like Shub-Niggurath or Yog-Sothoth, giving the name Sheogorath a certain demonic flair. Finally, you may notice that Sheogorath's speech is somewhat of a mix between a Scottish and Irish accent. In a Reddit AMA, the voice actor, Wes Johnson, mentioned that he modeled the Mad God's mannerisms after the Scottish singer Billy Connolly, and added an occasional Irish flair to some other words to demonstrate the Daedra's constant mood swings. Funny enough, the phrase Tá seo gorach in Scots Gaelic translates to "this is stupid" or "silly" in English. Perhaps an unrelated coincidence, but too funny not to mention. And finally, we come to the last, alphabetically at least, Daedric Prince. If you, after watching this video, somehow thought that we will end on a positive note, I'm afraid I must disappoint you. Vaermina is the Prince of Nightmares, the Weaver of Dreams, and the Dark Lady of Corruption and Decay. So yes, the similarities to Namira, Nocturnal, and Peryite are not only quite obvious, but also emphasize the Daedric pantheon's, more often than not, completely evil alignment. Now, what sets Vaermina apart from her similarly unpleasant colleagues is her MO, or modus operandi, the Latin phrase meaning her working habits. In sharp contrast to the flamboyancy of Sheogorath, and arguably even more subtle than the likes of Namira, the Dark Lady works through the human mind, through dreams and fears. That being said, she is also considered one of the more evil Daedra, perhaps not taking the MVP from Molag Bal, but too enjoying destruction for destruction's sake. It is said that all mortals come under Vaermina's sway as they sleep. It is during slumber that the Daedra sends visions, omens, and nightmares to torment her victims' minds. Sometimes she is even known to trap people within eternal nightmares, or dream loops, driving them insane. In a certain kind of way, Vaermina is truly the most terrifying and unsettling of the princes, for she strikes at our very core, breaching the most sacred of boundaries of our psyche, leaving nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Her realm of oblivion, Quagmire, is an appropriate reflection of this horror. It is a place of nightmare where quote-unquote reality shifts upon itself in incomprehensible, impossible ways. Mortal sleepers often find themselves slipping into this realm during their slumber, and Vaermina, from her citadel at the center of the realm, collects their memories and replaces them with nightmares of her own creation. Unsurprisingly, the Daedric prince of, essentially, gaslighting does not have an official following. As is custom with the darker of the Daedric deities, obscure and secretive cults follow the Dark Lady. Human sacrifices and other dark rituals are common, as well as their signature torture of forcing the cult's captives to endure horrific nightmares. Those of her followers that impress Vaermina are granted nightmarish gifts, in line with the Daedra's theme. The Skull of Corruption is perhaps the most well-known of these. A powerful artifact in the form of a staff, it creates a duplicate of its victim, and this clone proceeds to then attack the target of the staff. The Orb of Vaermina deserves a mention also, as in the right hands, it can be a shockingly overpowered tool. It allows for scrying, essentially being able to foretell the future, and this is exactly how Narfin, the Thalmor general in charge of the invasion of Cyrodiil leading up to the events of Skyrim, spied on Emperor Titus Mede and his armies. This was basically an equivalent of having a permanent UAV killstreak active at all times, which, particularly in a medieval period setting, is just complete hacking, and one of the main reasons why the Thalmor were able to perform so well in the Great War. Sleeping, and therefore dreaming, are integral parts not only of our lives, but indeed of our daily routine. Unsurprisingly, this phenomenon has been mythologized heavily, especially by the ancient Greeks, who literally have a god for everything. Morpheus is the deity the Greeks associated with dreaming the most. Son of Hypnos, the god of sleep, he is said to have visited mortals in their slumber to deliver divine messages, be it guidance or warnings. Unlike Vaermina, however, Morpheus is seen as a neutral, often even benevolent figure. Much more applicable is his lesser-known brother, Phobetor, the god of specifically nightmares, and also a minor spirit known as Epialis, who was said to be the actual personification of bad dreams. I've touched on this in the first video, but the actual word nightmare originates from mare, or Mara, a malicious spirit native to several European cultures' folklore. This demon was said to sit on a person's chest as they sleep, bringing bad dreams and causing the victim to break out in sweat and suffocate, gasping for air. If that sounds awfully familiar, it is indeed the mythologization of sleep paralysis, very much in line with Vaermina and her area of expertise. This highly unpleasant condition is also associated with another demonic entity that is said to haunt the dreams of mortals, the succubus, or incubus, if you like boys. Just so I can get demonetized right at the end of like an hour-long video, let's get into some details. These beings appeared in mortal dreams in order to seduce their victim, as they require the seed of men to survive. These semen demons would continue to haunt their prey until the man would eventually lose both physical health and mental sanity, and then ultimately his life. Vaermina too operates in a similar fashion, but the Daedric prince steals the memories of her victims as opposed to their, let's say, genetic material. And lastly, the name. Very clear similarity with the word vermin, Vaermina being the parasite that she is, but that is a bit too obvious.
Come on, man. That's too easy.
Other possibilities include the phonetically similar mare demon, as discussed previously, and the blood-red color vermilion, potentially highlighting the Daedra's insidious nature. Also to note, the Latin interjection word "y", meaning woe, as in "y victis", woe to the vanquished, famously said by the leader of the Gauls that sacked Rome in 390 BC. Mostly just a coincidence, but an interesting observation that the word is part of the malicious Daedra's name, Vaermina certainly being the source of much of Tamriel's woes. And with that, my friends, the list of Daedric princes is complete, save for Ethelia, who might warrant her own video in the future. It seems recently the only other type of content being made about Elder Scrolls is how there is no Elder Scrolls. I, for one, still have much to talk about in this setting that is so dear to me, and to all of you, since you are still here, 7 years after the Elder Scrolls 6 was announced. But with that being said, I have plenty of ideas on where to take this channel, topics to discuss, and videos to make, but I am more than happy to listen to your suggestions. If there is particular lore you want me to cover, or even any other interesting topics, do leave your thoughts down in the comments below. Many thanks for watching, and as always, a huge shout out to my Enwas, the members and Patreons to this channel. And it's okay, I can say the word. I have Dunmer friends and they say it all the time. More videos are on the way, and as always, until we meet again.